I can see we have an impressive attendance of about participants who've joined us, and this is indeed a privilege. So we begin, and once again, very warm welcome and greetings from Kolkata Regional Center on the occasion. Just a second.
ठीक है, फिर बाकी ट्राई ये करना पड़ेगा. तुम्हारा काम तक हो गया.
Can you please, may I request all of you to keep your mics, please mute your mics. So we will have this lecture in this format. We will have Professor Prasad give his special lecture, and if there's time, then we will take some questions. My request to all of you, all the participants and invited guests, please keep your mics, please mute your mics, and do not intervene in between, so that the lecture can carry on continuously. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of IGNOU Kolkata Regional Center, it is my proud privilege to welcome you all to this special lecture. We extend our heartiest welcome to all IGNOU learners, our esteemed alumni, and IGNOU's wide network and fraternity of universities and colleges who serve us relentlessly through their learner support centers. And just to make a note of it, we have about 35,000 part-time faculty counselors all over India serving us from different colleges and institutions. This lecture is being organized as part of Kolkata Regional Center's initiative to participate in the national agenda to energize education in India through transformative values that can make education universally seamless, lifelong, very pragmatic, relevant, innovative, value-enabled. There is a reason why I want to make a note of all these values here and all these new, these transformative values here. Also, education that we need to be in a flexible mode. We need our education to be learner-centric, technology-enabled, multidisciplinary, employable, and creatively project-driven for future India. All of us here will notice that there is a significant paradigm shift in the way education is being envisioned today. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to reiterate because all this is mostly in-house in the sense that we have a large number of participants who are already familiar with IGNOU, but we have Professor Amit Prasad out here who may not be familiar with IGNOU and its impact. So I just taking a little bit of time to introduce him to IGNOU. Indira Gandhi National Open University was established by the Government of India through an Act of Parliament in 1985 as an autonomous institution under the Ministry of Education. The university has its jurisdiction over the entire country and has been mandated to expand opportunities for quality higher education through technology-enabled open and distance learning in the country. It has consistently served the educational aspirations of 35 lakh students as per the 37th convocation. As you are aware, we've just completed our 37th convocation through its broad network of 57 regional centers all over India, 2,063 learner support centers, and a strong institutional presence with its 25 overseas study centers, which are all spread across 15 nations. Regional Center Kolkata was established at Kolkata in 1988 to meet the educational aspirations of 13 districts of West Bengal through a well-laid network of 35 study centers, serving more than 35,000 students. Ladies and gentlemen, this lecture will be widely reached through IGNOU's online platforms and through the Facebook Live and YouTube Live and our interactive website. We expect the outcome of this event to reach the optimum capacity of IGNOU's online footprint, which is approximately 35 lakh learners who transcend all barriers of age, gender, religion, language, region, national and international frontiers too. You may be all aware that we are also included in our Pan-African Network and the SARC Tele-Education Network and UNESCO. IGNOU's innovative practices through the value addition of technology-enabled open and distance learning have touched unimaginable frontiers of quality, expansion, and applicability. Open and distance education today is not an alternative any longer. It is a necessary and complementary means to revolutionize and transform education in India. The pandemic revealed the significance of online and open and distance learning to energize conventional education. Ladies and gentlemen, we feel it is time to reflect on the significance of molding the spirit of young, energetic India for the global world. Poised as it should be to be the future workforce for the global economy, it is our duty to ensure that they do not lose touch with our civilizational heritage. As beholders of an ancient legacy of wisdom that is exemplary and incomparable to any other in its commitment to universal values, inclusion, non-violence. All three values are very, very vital in the designing of a true scientific vision. We hope the lecture, Does Science and Technology Studies Provide Innovative Methodology and Analytics for Social Science Research, will open up a whole plethora of critical questions for our minds, steering us towards new realities so we can expand our frontiers of knowledge about science. This is important because while science and technology has exposed us to new methodologies and perspectives, critical thinking, the same perspectives and methodologies have also revealed some of the most gruesome realities about the world we live in. It becomes very important that we engaged with the meaning of Western science and its over-enthusiasm and preoccupation to be the truth finder and problem solver through its objective understanding of the reality we live in. From the intellectual location of Eastern scientific perspective, as we are all aware of, true reality is almost an oxymoron. Can we really find true reality? We hope this guest lecture will reveal how much we need to reflect on alternatives in defining our common future, so our global destiny becomes a reality for us, for all of us here, as we engage with our most impending challenges in the future, like diseases, poverty, environmental degradation. We need a fresh perspective and we need to understand alternatives. So here we are, and a very, very warm welcome to Professor Amit Prasad. He teaches in the School of History and Sociology at Georgia Institute of Technology, where he is also an affiliate faculty of the Atlanta Global Studies Center and the Institute for Bioengineering and Bioscience. His research is aimed at excavating the history of the present in relation to the post-decolonial, transnational, and global aspects of science, technology, and medicine. In particular, he investigates how genealogies of colonialism continue to animate present-day values, norms, ideologies, and practices, including in our own field. His research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, American Institute of Indian Studies, among others, and he has published in a number of journals, including Social Studies of Science, Science and Technology and Human Values, Theory, Culture and Society, Cultural Geography, Technology and Culture. I'm so impressed with the list of journals that are here, Professor Prasad. Thank you so much for being here with us. He's the author of Imperial Technoscience, Transnational Histories of MRI in United States, Britain and India, MIT and the Science Studies Meets Colonialism, Polity, Presently, he is writing a book on his decade-long study of a stem cell therapy clinic in India that is tentatively titled Miracle or Science. He is also the treasurer of the Society for Social Studies of Science and the editor of the journal Science, Technology, and Society. Well, the list keeps on, and we are so happy, and we are so happy to have you here with us. Our students will be thoroughly enlightened, and their exposure to global research in the field of social sciences will be so much more, intricate after this. Thank you so much, Professor Prasad. Can you please take? I see you sometimes, and I just is it the connection, or are you there? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Professor Prasad. And we'll just open the. I would once again request all of you, please keep your mics mute and do not intervene in between. If you have a question, put it up on the comment section, and we will be taking that up later. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Professor Dutta, for this very kind introduction, and also for introducing me to your educational and intellectual community of IGNOU, which is extremely impressive. I must admit that having not lived in India for a long time now, it's really a good thing to know about all these wonderful things that you people are doing. I wish to say this is an honor, of course, to talk to you people, and in particular because Professor Dutta and I, we go a long way. We did our masters together at Delhi School of Economics before we went our own paths, but we still have engaged intellectually and otherwise for a long time. So what I would do today, or what I planned to do, was twofold. I should take about 35 odd minutes or something like this around that time. And the idea here for me is that twofold. One is to introduce this particular subfield which emerged, which is a part of sociology, but also an interdisciplinary field with philosophy, historians, as well as some other anthropologists who have come together to study how scientific knowledge is produced in the labs themselves. So there are people who study this, they are trained in the sciences, or they go into various aspects of studying science. And one of the things they have discussed is how science is context dependent. So what I would do here is make a presentation around 35 minutes so that it gives us some time for question answers. And what I would do is that after elaborating a little bit on the science and technology studies, I would specifically discuss the scientific misinformation question in relation to the United States in particular, what happened during the pandemic, just to show how this could be used in a particular case. What I should also admit at the outset that I'm not used to using Google Meet. For some reason, like our institute uses Zoom. And so I will try my best. I want to share the screen. I want to show slides. And I hope it should be all right. Okay. Okay. I'm not able to show my...
It's a 3 button there. Let me just ask my tech team. Kostav, are you there? Can you email that to us? Kostav, you're there. Professor Prasad, can you just email it to us?
Oh, yeah.
So he can share it for you.
Okay. Did it work now?
No.
Okay, window, share. Does it work now?
No.
Yeah.
There. It's yes, it's working.
Is it okay now? Can you see the screen?
We can see the screen. Do you have a slide here? The screen.
Yeah.
The slide is not visible.
Does science and technology studies? Yeah. I have opened the PPT and it is on my screen.
Oh, okay. The screen is not showing that. Why?
Okay, let me go back. It is saying it is sharing a window. Okay, it shows I'm presenting, but for some reason it does not.
Yeah. It shows you're presenting.
Let me try again. Let me try again one more time. Give me 1 second.
Yes.
So I should share the window or the entire screen. Oh, window. Okay. So
Shut the fuck up, Professor.
Check.
Yeah. I am doing that.
Will it be easier if you email us and somebody else shares it from here, or what? No.
Can I just do that like in a second quickly?
Kostav, can you do that? If he's I think it'll be better if you share it on the just email it to RC Kolkata.
Okay, just give me 1 second. I'm just, this is a worry that I have.
Professor.
George Gopala, can you? Yeah.
So yeah, I am sending. Okay, I just sent it.
Kostav, have you received?
Let me try again one more time. This is the problem with, these are the things which are the interesting things which have occurred in the new times, but better than being able to.
The convenience of which is also amazing, because Calcutta is in almost floods now, and we had to we left office early, and only my tech team is in office right now. I could leave early, and if it had been a physical mode, we would have been stuck somewhere.
That's true. Today. Oh, come on! It shows it shows me the PowerPoint, but it just shows as a blank screen for some reason.
Kostav, did you get it? Just give us a word. Okay. All right. Okay, you got it.
Okay, it'll take us like.
Yes. A little bit maybe about your work. Just to keep
the
spirit
thing going.
Of all the others. Yes.
So one of the things which is very, very fascinating to me, like my undergraduate was in physics. Physics honors, and then I shifted to sociology. And one of the ways we have always seen science is that as though it is over and above. It is over and above basically the society itself. And what we often do not seem to understand that how actually they play out. In the sense of the fact that how is science impacted by society? Even when we study that, what we often do is that, okay, science is already formed, knowledge is already produced, and then how it impacts. But what we do not look into is that how in the very process of production of knowledge, social or the society plays a very, very important role. Now, what happens here is that there is some other much deeper issues that start like going into looking into these kinds of, when we look into these things. For example, we start thinking that the moment we have anything social in the scientific aspects of things, that means we are biased. This is one of the things that the field of science and technology studies has tried to move beyond. And so this is a field which emerged in Europe and US, but it has become much broader. In fact, very recently, there is a Science Technology Studies India group which was started, and they were present at Amsterdam when I was there at the Forest Conference right now. So there are all of these things there. I would also suggest, like many of you, to think about this, to study like various aspects of science technology, as Professor Datta mentioned this also, that, oh yeah, I can see it now.
That comes there. Maybe at
Yeah.
some point of time you can talk about your stem cells, which was interesting me a lot. Your stem cells research and the social science thing later at some point of time. I'm sorry.
I think I mean, I would love to do that. And in fact, today I decided not to talk more about it because I thought that would take a separate thing as well. So
Yes.
maybe let me just start because we're already at 7:53. I mean, my
Shut the fuck
7:53
up,
a.m.
Taklu.
George Gopala, can you keep your mic muted? Yes. Okay. Please carry on. Yeah.
And what I'll do is that just to keep this in, like, I'll just say next slide so that we can move further. So let me start on a personal note that would also allow me to situate the field of science and technology studies, or STS, in relation to, if you can pause there for a moment, STS in relation to intellectual engagements in India. When I had joined Delhi School of Economics to do a master's in sociology, because of my background in physics and interest in doing sociology of science, I got soon identified as a potential student of JPS Uberoi. And you can see him on the left. Uberoi, who recently died after a long and illustrious career, as I guess many of you know, was one of the pioneers of sociology of science in India, and I would say even more broadly, sociology. His first book on sociology of science, which was published in 1978, was Science and Culture, and thereafter in 1984, he published the widely known The Other Mind of Europe, Goethe as a Scientist, the one which you see on the right side. And both of these books grabbed a lot of attention. He was initially trained as an engineer at the University College London in the 1950s, and then did his PhD in anthropology from Australian National University before coming to India to teach. Uberoi argued that the origins of modern Western science can be genealogically traced to a theological intervention of Ulrich Zwingli. He was one of the Protestant reformers, one of the key figures of Protestant Reformation movement in medieval Europe, because it represented the first articulation of a distinction between fact and value. This discursive separation of fact and value, according to Uberoi, found a particular expression in the positivist science that, according to him, still holds sway in the universities of the West and through them in the universities in the non-West as well. Uberoi critiqued this positivist science, which he argues is evident in various linear ways of looking at things, and instead he proposed non-dualist ways of looking at things. In that, he draws both from Indian tradition of non-dualist philosophy as well as looks in the West. So one of the important things to bear in mind here is he did not want to, okay, we just lost the PowerPoint screen.
George Gopala, are you presenting? Please, can you just sorry about that.
No worries. No worries.
Carry on. I'm requesting everyone to be a little careful and just be there.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Uberoi's concern was not science or scientific method understood in a narrow sense. The intellectual problems that he addressed is much broader. To quote him, from our non-Western point of view, it is the problem of science and Swaraj, that is of intellectual enlightenment and cultural identity, or at the individual level of how to become a modern scientist and still remain oneself, because this is always like conflated together of that how Europeans were inherently scientific. Such a concern is seen in the work of other pioneers of sociology of science in India as well. For example, Ashish Nandi, who published his book Alternative Sciences in 1980, he also had, though his approach was different. Then, of course, Shiv Vishwanathan, another person who showed science, more specifically scientific experiment, relied on vivisection that intimately tied modern science to violence. And he particularly talked about the atomic bomb experiments. Indeed, as Vishwanathan's long-standing work on science continually illustrates how we understand and do science embodies forms of democracies. And as such, our choice of how we do science is intimately tied to what kind of democracy we want to live in. I have started with this early history of sociology of science in India for two reasons. First, to highlight that parallel to the emergence of the field of science and technology studies in the European and American universities in the second half of the 1970s and thereafter, a very vibrant and productive debate on the relationship between science and society was taking place in India as well as a few other non-Western countries. But very often when we discuss this in the West, we forget what was happening in the other parts of the world. Secondly, as I have shown in my recent book, Science Studies Meets Colonialism, if you could go to the next slide, the failure of the field of science and technology studies to carefully engage with these debates also resulted in the erasure of the role of European colonialism in the imaginary and practice of science. For example, in the book here, I showed that how even though the field, my own field, science and technology studies, has been very progressive in certain ways, it continuously erases the role that is played by the non-Western societies. I'll be happy to discuss all these things during Q&A, but as of now, let me provide a brief overview of the field of science technology studies, and then I'll discuss how its tools can be useful to better understand intellectual concerns of social sciences. Just bear with me as I discuss it a little more because I feel that many of you may not be knowing about this subfield. The field of science and technology studies, or STS, as it is commonly called, shifted the focus of sociological, historical, and philosophical studies of science, technology, and medicine from the context of justification to the context of practice. What this means here is that earlier philosophers, historians, and sociologists rarely, if ever, investigated how science was practiced in the lab. Very often than not, we studied after something had been produced in the lab. The actual practice of science was thus left as a black box. We did not know actually what is going on inside. STS scholars train their gaze on the practice of science in the lab. If you could go to the next slide, please. STS and so these are the two classic books that are very often which started the thing. One is by Steve Woolgar and Bruno Latour, Laboratory Life, and the other is Manufacture of Knowledge by Karen Norsetina. STS thus empirically showed that the production of scientific knowledge is context dependent. Science was not, to use the famous phrase of another STS scholar, Donna Haraway, seeing everywhere from nowhere, but a situated knowledge and practice. To show how science was situated in the context of its production was not an easy task, though. Apart from training to understand the scientific concepts, new methodological and analytical tools were needed. David Bloor was among the first to present a set of principles for science and technology studies that's still widely accepted in the field of STS. If you could go to the next slide. And these 4 principles have been, please go to the next slide. So the 4 principles are causality, that is, examine the conditions that bring about claims of certain knowledge; impartiality, that is, examine successful as well as unsuccessful knowledge claims; symmetry, that is, same type of explanations are used for successful and unsuccessful knowledge claims; and last is reflexivity. It must be applicable to sociology itself. So these are the 4 principles that he had presented in Knowledge and Social Imagery. These principles radically altered how we view science and investigate scientific practice. Let me give an example. I'm sure people here know about eugenics or scientific racism. In the first half of the 20th century, it was very popular science in the West, particularly in the United States. Very often in the non-West, we think that it was only Nazi Germany which practiced scientific racism or eugenics. But very often, actually, the Nazi scientists used to look up to the United States to say how actually they are the ones who are far ahead in terms of scientific racism, which basically created this hierarchy with regard to whites and non-whites. Scientists doing eugenics research used very precise and elaborate techniques. So it was not really that it was just people were just cooking up ideas. They were using cranial measurements, and their findings were published in widely respected scientific journals, including social science journals, and were accepted by policymakers. The way we see eugenics at present is that it is a flawed science wherein social values came to guide scientific practice, which science was able to purge. That is to say that, oh, there was this negativity that had come into science, but because of the inherent objectivity of science, it was able to purge it, and it again came back to its commitment to truth and objectivity. Now, again, I would try to highlight here, and this is a nuanced way to understand the way I'm trying to project here, and what my field tries to do with STS is not to abandon objectivity. What it shows is that how objectivity itself is not over and above everything else, over and above the social context. Now, this does not necessarily mean that science is biased at all. So what STS did here was they say that first, that we have to analyze eugenics with the same principle that we use with regard to any other sciences. Not to say that, oh, it is a biased science or false science or anything of that kind. And what eugenics reflected was basically the social or the society of the time. And that we see even in other sciences of the present. Now, this does not necessarily mean that science is biased, as I said. For example, in my study of MRI, that is commonly used for imaging the brain and other parts of the body, I think many of you might have gotten an MRI scan done because it's become so common these days. Initially, what they had decided, and this is a little bit technical, so bear with me. Initially, what they realized is that in order to have a uniform magnetic field, they had to keep the thing cylindrical. You might have seen that those of you who got an MRI scan done, that you go into a cylindrical hole wherein the scan is done. Now, that was done because of a particular scientific concern. But parallel to it, there was a social concern that the moment you put people inside a cylindrical kind of a tube like that, there was claustrophobia. So what it was decided was that you make the imaging times shorter so that people have less claustrophobia, which meant there was a compromise on basically what you call the resolution of the images itself. So what you see here is that it is objective, but it is context dependent, and the social plays a role. What I wish to argue here is that a belief in the idealized understanding of science, which is seen as universal and truth in all contexts, also results in caricaturing the role of STS and resulted in accusations against it for discrediting science or for dissolving any difference between fiction and science. But for example, if you go to the next slide, in there, there are these arguments that are presented that how Bruno Latour, one of the best known science technology studies scholar, that how he was basically a post-truth philosopher. STS is never trying to say that okay, everything is socially constructed in the sense that it could be a fiction you could have. It just shows that how science is also context dependent. Even simple things like your gravity. It is context dependent in the sense it is dependent on the mass and the shape of the earth. There is no doubt that fake news, particularly the way they morph realities, which has also been called post-truth, and spread like wildfire through social media is perhaps one of the most important concerns of the time. And what I'll do here is use this example to show that why perhaps looking at from a slightly different perspective allows us to go much further to understand misinformation. The definition of post-truths are undergirded by an opposition between objective facts and subjective values, which understandably results in the classification, for example, of COVID misinformation as anti-science. However, we need to critically interrogate what terms such as post-truth or for that matter anti-science mean and entail and investigate them symmetrically rather than simply dismissing them as false beliefs. For example, something which I'm not going to discuss in that great detail, what I had found was that exactly same misinformation or conspiracy was interpreted quite differently by, okay, the PowerPoint is again gone. We might have to get back the PowerPoint. That's okay. We'll have a little bit of up down. That's okay. If you can get the PowerPoint back. So the same misinformation and conspiracy was interpreted quite differently among the Black community as opposed to the white community in the United States. So let me go further into the details because this had become so important. In February 2020, when COVID-19 infections had started to spread globally, the World Health Organization or WHO warned against an accompanying massive infodemic. In fact, they devised a new term, coined a new term called infodemic, parallel to the time when it was emerging, the pandemic was starting to spread. In the months that followed, as we know, misinformation and conspiracies regarding COVID spread like wildfire and critically impacted healthcare provision all across the world. Okay, no worries. So, can you go to the next slide? Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so let's move on. So what was happening with all of these various conspiracies, and this became very, very big, even in the countries like United States or Britain, literally all across the world. And I don't want to discuss in greater detail all those, but very often the argument was that there is an urgent need to deal with this anti-science attitudes. In some ways, what we have experienced today would allow us to better understand why I'm insisting on a more complex understanding with regard to misinformation and conspiracies, because we got a first-hand experience. If we can go to the next slide, please. The article and the book that is, let's go to the next slide then. Yeah, the article and the book that is there is being written by Peter Hotez, who is the founding dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, as well as the director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development. Similarly, in June 2020, when the pandemic was ravaging the US, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has been the director of National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease from 1984, and advised 8 US presidents, had warned that there was an alarmingly large percentage of people with anti-science attitude. Now, these concerns are very understandable. But it also begs the question, what do we mean when we use the term anti-science? Moreover, by classifying the responses against vaccines and other healthcare measures such as mask mandate as anti-science, are we missing something? In the sense, can we better understand sociologically what is going on with regard to misinformation or even the info bombing that occurred just in a moment back or something? For example, in my study, I did not find even one single COVID-19 conspiracy spreader who called himself, herself, or themselves anti-science. Instead, they use the credibility of scientists, and scientific journals to spread their misinformation and conspiracies. So just calling them blanket anti-science does not allow us to understand how this is occurring in this nuanced way. This was happening all across the world, even in the countries that managed the pandemic really well. It is also important to note that many scientists were involved in spreading misinformation as well. In order to better understand COVID misinformation, what we need to investigate is how, for example, the truthfulness of a representation or the facticity of a representation becomes hostage to its circulation and mobilization within a particular social group, something which we literally saw a few moments back. If you go to the next slide, please. For example, in May 2020, pandemic, a 26-minute COVID misinformation and conspiracy video, if you go to the next slide, was posted online on several social media platforms and soon went viral. This video, which is an interview of a virologist, Dr. Judy Mikovits, starts with the claim. Dr. Judy Mikovits, as you can see on the slide itself, has been one of the most accomplished scientists of her generation. Her 1991 doctoral thesis revolutionized the treatment of HIV/AIDS, and then goes on.
Costa, what happened?
Yeah. So, sorry, I've unmuted myself. So the video, one of the things to bear in mind, which as I said, that the video went viral, and one of the things to bear in mind with misinformation and conspiracies is that they continue to have presence in cyberspace even after we have, like, for example, Google, YouTube, and others, they stopped or they banned the video. So it is being shown through, let's say, Patriot TV by changing the name or otherwise. And the video has been often referenced by various other people. Now, Judy Mikovits. Yeah. Hello. Sorry, like what is happening for some reason is that I'm being thrown out of the Google Meet and then I'm coming back to it, and that is when it becomes muted. I hope it doesn't occur. So if you go to the next slide, please. So she has also written a book called Plague of Corruption, Restoring Faith in the Promise of Science. And please go to the next slide. And in there also, what Judy Mikovits, what it is shown is that how she co-founded and directed the first neuroimmune disease institute using systems biology approach and other things. Can you please go to the next slide? So far from presenting herself as an anti-science warrior, Mikovits actually prominently displays her scientific credentials. And this is even with regard to her co-author. So deployment of the credibility of science and scientists to spread misinformation and conspiracies was in fact quite common. For example, Reverend Danny Jones, a senior pastor in North Lake Baptist Church in Gainesville, Georgia, who does not shy away from calling his claims conspiracies, in a sermon on Bill Gates' role in implanting a microchip through the vaccine in order to create a new world order, that became another of the conspiracies. Can you go to the next slide, please? This was the Bill Gates conspiracy, that how he knew and he wanted to control the world. The previous one, please. Oh, no, after this, sorry. Go to the next one. Next one. This is where it shows that how both of them displayed. So if you go one more, so what you see here is that how even a Nobel Prize winner is supporting what like Mikovits was talking about with regard to not having trust in vaccination and all that. Please go to the next slide. I jumped a little bit here. So here is the right side was like a photograph that became viral, wherein it is showing Bill Gates basically how he's controlling the world, because how they will do is that they will implant a chip while you are getting the vaccination done. Now, of course, like that is ridiculous in scientific terms. But what was interesting is how again it became viral and it was interpreted very differently by different groups. Now in here, I'm just showing, for example, if you go that, so this is the sermon that this person was giving, which again became viral. He says that on December 23, 2019, the prestigious Scientific American magazine reported that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and MIT, that is Massachusetts Institute of Technology, had developed a biometric tattoo where a nanochip can be injected into your forearm. So what you see here again is that Reverend Jones' sermon received a lot of attention, and the video also was posted on various online sites. Now, what you see again here is that how there is an invocation of the Scientific American, a very well-established science magazine, to spread a conspiracy. So, and this is even the readers and viewers of the conspiracy and misinformation were often no different in their reliance on the credibility of science to affirm their faith in particular conspiracies and misinformation. One of the reviewers of this book, Plague of Corruption, for example, wrote, "Before we restore faith in science, we have to know it was lost." Another reviewer wrote, "If you are a critical thinker and you would like to see through the eyes of an American scientist, you will love this book." What again and again I'm trying to show here is that by just calling this misinformation anti-science, what it hides is that how in very complex ways science and scientists and the credibility of them is being used for the spread of misinformation. Now, what we also need to understand then is what are the kinds of alignments that come about in terms of when this such kind of misinformation is being spread. So, for example, in this case, there were very often invocation of the faith in Jesus and Christianity that was talked about. Their criticism of the political elite were often followed with calls such as "Wake up, Christians," or "Trust only in the Lord," or "Get up close and personal with Jesus Christ." And similar thing was there in other places wherein, again, other religion gods were used for this kinds of references. Religious, specifically Christian idiom, was also used by another Capitol Hill staffer, but they were also being used for a wide variety of other purposes. For example, this Capitol Hill's staffer, who is also a part of the Fox News, she used it to make a claim with regard to an anti-abortion. So what you see is a variety of alignment that is coming about in this regard. What we need to see very much in the Gramscian sense is to understand how actually even misinformation is a window to understand various kinds of social alignments and how they come about. So an overarching characterization of misinformation and conspiracies as anti-science is thus not only intellectually lazy, it also inhibits a proper understanding of how misinformation and conspiracy spread through entanglements of various social interests. Theda Skocpol, drawing on her study of opposition to climate science, suggested in a recent interview that, if you go to the next slide, please, she suggested that it isn't, and she's a very well-known political scientist, it isn't religious conservatives who were unaware of science or rejected scientific findings. It is that they resent the use of experts as political authorities. Can you please go to the next slide? But what you see here, one of the things we often forget is that both Democrats, I mean, in the US, for example, Democrats and Republicans, both of them, they did trust in experts and the scientists. They often reiterated that kind of a thing which was there. And what was happening here is that we also bear in mind is that even the anti-vaccination thing that has been going on during COVID and even before it, they always relied on a variety of different experts. We see this in climate science as well. Very often, scientists are themselves deployed in a variety of ways to make a certain kind of a claim which is against, let's say, global warming or climate change. A scientific expert can nonetheless become the target of partisan politics via conspiracy, as was evident in the persistent claims of several Republican senators and Congress members in relation to Dr. Fauci. If you can go to the next slide, please. Interestingly, even in such partisan attacks, the credibility of science has been used to foil, not only as a foil, not only to discredit, but also to reiterate COVID-19 misinformation. So, for example, Dr. Fauci, responding to various conspiracy and misinformation about him, stated that the attacks on me, and I'm quoting him here, quite frankly, are attacks on science. On the other hand, and this is happening in the US Senate itself, that US Senator Marsha Blackburn, who was one of the proponents of a conspiracy that claimed Dr. Fauci's role in the origin of coronavirus, she responded, and I'm quoting her again, "I'm not attacking science. What I'm doing is standing up for science." She went on to state that Dr. Fauci should have learned in science class that you need evidence to support a claim. Fauci was again evasive and dishonest. The issue here is not whether Senator Blackburn is making a false claim about science or Dr. Fauci is overstating his claim about science, rather than highlighting the partisan politics, for example. These invocations of science show that the credibility of science remains a potent and indisputable explanatory mechanism for all sides. More broadly, what I'm trying to show, and I want to emphasize, that the definition of science as a universal objective truth maker or whatever else, like around that kind of understanding, has become so capacious and broad that it can include a wide variety of claims which are understandably not demonstrable through various facts. And that is a problem. So in a sense, making science situated or understanding science situated is actually much more helpful for us. Otherwise, as I've been showing here, that even the misinformation becomes very, very hard to understand. Interestingly, during COVID pandemic, scientists were also co-opted in the geopolitical contestation between the United States and China. I'm sure most of you have heard of references such as Wuhan flu, Chinese virus, or even Kung flu. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, these kinds of references were commonly used by then President Trump, the then President Donald Trump. And it also led to a variety of attacks on particularly Asian Americans, which also reflected the long history of the racial concern, which has been called the Yellow Peril, particularly with regard to the East Asians. The conspiracy centered around the origin of COVID-19 regained momentum after President Joe Biden instituted an investigation into the possible Chinese origin of coronavirus. So I want to emphasize here that this is the interesting paradox. So a lot of the times these kinds of conspiracies, particularly the lab origin conspiracy, was shown in the time of President Trump. But it again got revitalized when President Biden took over. If you can go to the next slide. And this is actually the White House statement which was given. So, yeah. That he says that the origins of COVID-19 could be, to quote him, from human contact with an infected animal or from a laboratory accident. And so it goes on to say that how United States should keep working with like-minded partners to look into the lab origin of the coronavirus, even though there was no extra evidence which was shown that the lab origin could be possible there. The US media went on an overdrive to show how the lab leak theory is plausible after President Biden's statement. Can you go to the next slides, the next two slides, please? So there were things like intelligence on 6 staff at Wuhan lab fuels debate on COVID-19 origin. Again, there was no evidence provided even by Wall Street Journal. If you go to the next one. And these are very, very well respected. So this is at Vanity Fair, the lab leak theory inside the fight to uncover COVID-19 origin. Again, no new scientific evidence is provided. As the lab origin theory of COVID was given credence in the media, the evidence against the lab origin of coronavirus, including the statements by an Australian virologist, Daniel Anderson, who was working at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in November 2019, were sidelined in the process. In fact, after Dr. Anderson, in collaboration with another scientist, declared publicly that the claims of lab origin could be misleading, she had her name publicly trashed so viciously. And again, what you see is how social media comes to play a role in defining what is true or false. Can you go to the next slide, please? That she had to call police, and all kinds of various racial epithets were being used, even when she was making a claim, rather than trying to look at what was the evidence. Let me return to President Biden's statement. Interestingly, he does not refer to science or scientists even once in his statement that was released in by the White House on May 26, 2021. Scientists who by and large had argued against the possible lab origins of SARS-CoV-2, that is the coronavirus, were however also involved in the resurgence on the Chinese lab origin discourse. A few days before the White House released President Biden's statement calling for an investigation, several scientists published a letter in Science that was titled, and can you go to the next slide, please? So this is a letter, and letters, as we do know, letter published in scientific journals are treated as articles. It literally called for investigate the origins of COVID-19. This particular call for investigation quickly became widespread and provided legitimacy to a claim that was largely associated with conspiracy theorists and had remained peripheral concern for a large section of scientists. Now, again, what you see here is that science and scientists, particularly scientists, are divided, and they have been playing into both sides. These scientists call for an investigation into the possible lab origins of COVID-19 that was published in the journal Science is telling. It states, and I'm quoting, the quote is not here, but I'll just quote here. As scientists with relevant expertise, we agree with the WHO Director General, the United States, and 13 other countries, and the European Union that greater clarity about the origins of this pandemic is necessary and feasible. Can you please go to the next slide? The claim of these scientists reads like a diplomatic brief. To highlight the support of, to quote again, the United States and 13 other countries, this article cites a statement issued by the US State Department in March 2021. That is, it does not cite again any scientific material, but rather the statement made by the White House. The claim of these scientists is also misleading. The WHO Director General, who, as Reuters had claimed, got caught in Trump-China feud and was under siege throughout the pandemic, this is what he had actually said. Although, and this is, I'm quoting him here, the second quote here, although the WHO team has concluded that a lab leak is the least likely hypothesis, this requires further investigation, potentially with additional missions involving specialist experts, which I'm ready to deploy. So what you again see is that WHO was not at all making any categorical claim as is being made by the scientists. Responding to the resurgence of calls for investigation of the lab origins of COVID-19, an article published in Nature argued that the evidence presented as indicative of a possible lab origin of the virus could as well be witnessed in the context of a natural origin. David Relman, a microbiologist at Stanford University in California, who is the lead author of the statement calling for an investigation of the lab origins of COVID-19 in the journal Science, which I just showed some time back, he said, and I'm quoting here, as you can see here, I'm not saying I believe the virus came from a laboratory. However, the authors of the WHO investigation report were too decisive in their conclusions. Now, this is exactly the same kind of a trope which was used over and over again by various misinformation and conspiracy spreaders. They would say that the scientific claim that has been made by the Center for Disease Control and other scientists who are supporting like use of vaccines, they were too decisive and there was not ample evidence which was there. So it is really ironic that a very well-regarded scientist uses exactly the same trope for the lab origin kind of a conspiracy theory. Relman is not asked what additional evidence led him and his co-authors to call for such an investigation, considering among other known facts, as an article in the journal Nature had pointed out that lab leaks have never caused an epidemic, though they have resulted in small outbreaks. Now, let me clarify. I'm neither suggesting that concern of these scientists is misplaced, nor arguing that there is no possibility of a lab origin of the virus. Now, that has also been set to rest. I simply wish to highlight that the concern about the origin of coronavirus raised by scientists in the reputed journal Science is forked and explicitly entangled with the concern of several Western countries with the rise of China. If you can go to the next slides, please. And this was evident during the, so there was all these kinds of concern that how China, by sending the vaccines and all, was creating a diplomacy and things like that in Latin America. And in the Western countries, including the United States, they had refused to actually distribute initially the vaccines. I mean, understandably, their own society was a big concern. But it became almost like a US versus China, in which, again, the scientists got involved. Can you go to the next slide? And this became very evident in the strange image of the G7 meeting that was held during the COVID pandemic, where you can see that this photograph is from CNN itself. What I wish to show here through this example, my field of science and technology studies, when it has shown that how science is situated and how we understand objectivity of science has to be understood even in context-dependent ways. So, for example, the claims that the vaccine worked certain times and it did not work certain times has to be seen in the context. That is how science operates. This is a new virus and the vaccine could not be developed so easily. And it is only over time that it could have been developed. But this losing this context dependence actually made it further a target with regard to anti-vaccine kinds of conspiracies. More broadly, what I wish to state here is that we need to understand science, scientists, as well as scientific journals as a part of society. They are not like gods over and above outside, because if we go like that, we end up being in a place where all kinds of anti-science have been like brought together in terms of as a science itself. I have jumped certain parts because I thought we have lost fair amount of time so that we can leave certain sections. We can have some question answers at least. because the utility of having such kind of things, and I again thank Professor Datta for organizing it. Okay, and we got a first-hand experience of how social media operates in terms of how information spread itself. So the fact that we are talking of misinformation here, it's very, very useful. So what I would do is that I would stop here, and maybe perhaps we can have some question answers, some Q&A, this short Q&A session.
Thank you so much for that. There is for that wonderful lecture, and I think this was a great opportunity for all our learners out here. And as you could see, very rightly, sometimes we in trying to make it too widespread, what happens is we sometimes forget that there is a kind of decorum for certain special lectures, and this is not pertaining to any kind of discipline as such. And the invitations had gone to students, learners across disciplines, so that we could have participation. But probably I do apologize for the kind of anarchy that you found in the presentation, but I think we take it well. And as Professor Prasad was saying, is there any would some of you would like to have any questions? We can still find people wanting to join this. So obviously it has been going on for a long time. I don't know. So some maybe genuine learners are missing out in the process, but we will have it in the social media, so all is not lost. Your lecture would be still there, so anyone can. But right now here, is there, I will probably take a couple of questions, but relevant questions, if I may say so. Please, relevant to what you understood from Professor Prasad's special lecture out here. I can see a few hands raised. Vansh, sorry, Ajit Prasad. Ajit Prasad, your hand is raised. Would you like to ask? Do you have any question? Vansh. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. You have muted. We have actually forcefully muted. All the mics have been. I request all learners to maintain some decorum, and please interact only if you have a question too. So, who was it? Ajit Prasad? Did you want to say something? And there's Vansh, Unial, Jugal Kishore. You can put your, can they put their mics on now?
Hello, yes?
Yes, yes, Ajit Prasad. Yes.
So the question is that, can I say that the difference between science and social science is that unscientific approach or unscientific method or techniques that social scientists uses? Can you see that? I mean to say that there is nothing difference between, according to the lecture, there is nothing
आप हिंदी में भी बोल सकते हैं. Would you like to talk in Hindi? Because
yes, of
this
course.
is yes.
मेरे कहने का मतलब ये है कि क्या हम ऐसा बोल सकते हैं कि जो साइंस है और जो सोशल साइंस है, इसमें बस इतना ही डिफरेंस है कि जो सोशल साइंटिस्ट जिस अप्रोच अनसाइंटिफिक अप्रोच को जो यूज करते हैं उसको जस्टिफाई करने के लिए वो सोशल साइंस का नाम दे देते हैं. मतलब मेरे कहने का मतलब ये है कि इस लेक्चर के अनुसार यहाँ कोई डिफरेंस नहीं है साइंस और सोशल साइंस में. सोशल साइंस मस्ट बी साइंटिफिक एज वेल.
Professor Prasad, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good observation. And I would say here is that not just that a broad difference between social science and natural sciences. For example, if you were to do biology and physics, the way experiments are done in biology and the way experiments are done in physics are quite different. So what you see is that each of them have their own methodologies. The question here is of rigor. So what needs to be asked, the broader question that one needed to ask here is that not whether it was scientific, anti-scientific or something like that, but in the sense of, does it show evidence in terms of rigors of proof? And social science also has devised its own technique. So for example, we do see very strong parallels between, for example, the way evidence or proof is used in law or the way it is used in the sciences. And these are different ways it has emerged in terms of having proof. And my argument in a sense here is, instead of trying to deploy the terms like that, okay, whether we are scientific or not, what we should look at is whether our method is rigorous enough in terms of tell us about the data in a proper way. So that is what I was trying to show with my example, that if we go into like use social science methods, which I did, I am able to show that how science itself was being used to spread misinformation. So you are right in that kind of this thing. And I would say here is that I'm not presenting it as a negatively at all, because the moment we say that as though there is no difference, the argument becomes is that as though, oh, anything goes. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm just saying what we need to focus on, how are the method rigorous, how have they been established through various practices within the discipline. And each discipline, economics has very different from, let's say, sociology. History does in a very different way. For example, I've published in History Journal and I've published in Sociology Journal. And I remember sending an article to a history journal and the person said, like the editor had said, this was a long time back, that this is not written in the history style. So there is a certain way evidence is invoked in history as opposed to sociology. That does not mean one is false or one is less. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Okay, sir, I understand that. Thank you so much.
If I may add in a little bit to what Professor Prasad was just saying, especially in the context of जो अभी जो हम लोग transformative education के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, because Professor Prasad, we are also emphasizing a lot on vernacular medium also. So since we made it a very English dominating discourse, I was just thinking I will just clarify a little thing. जो अभी प्रोफेसर प्रसाद ने कहा है कि देखिए हम लोग इतना पर्टिकुलर हो जाते हैं डिसिप्लिनरी बाउंड्रीज को मेंटेन करते हुए, हम साइंस हिस्ट्री में साइंस ऐसे है, सोशल साइंस में साइंस ऐसे है, फिजिक्स में साइंस ऐसे है, साइंटिफिक अप्रोच ऐसे बोल के द लॉस इज एक्चुअली जो होता है वो नॉलेज का होता है. द अल्टीमेट आउटकम ऑफ व्हाट नॉलेज इज कमिंग हैज टू ऑलवेज बी होलिस्टिक. सो इसमें सोशल साइंस और जो अभी जो हम लोग इवन ये जो न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में जो हम लोग बात कर रहे हैं, वी आर ट्राइंग टू मूव बियॉन्ड दिस बैरियर्स ऑफ डिसिप्लिन. ये जो डिवीजन हम लोगों ने बनाया हुआ है, इन सबसे बाहर निकल के जो हमें बताना है वो है जो हिस्ट्री के लिए ऑथेंटिक है वो सोशियोलॉजी के लिए भी ऑथेंटिक है, वो फिजिक्स के लिए भी ऑथेंटिक है. जो डिफरेंस है वो है पर्सपेक्टिव. आप कैसे मेथड्स कितना जेन्युइन है आपका, उसी के हिसाब से उसका डिफरेंसेस है जो है उसको हम लोग देख सकते हैं. तो just a little bit of what I wanted to say, because we become, in fact, we become so obsessed in our efforts to firstly find out what is objectivity in terms of, as though there are just fixed boundaries of objectivity, and everywhere these boundaries are so flexible. I mean, we are constantly moving from one boundary to one level to another, and this interaction is very important. Anyone
I was trying to say. So thank you so much, and there is no problem in English. So it's for
okay. Yes. No, even otherwise, आपके लिए नहीं, even otherwise हमारे जो अभी जो even as a university, आपको पता है कि हम लोग अभी even कोलकाता रीजनल सेंटर में हमारे सारे जो हमारे efforts है वो है to translate everything and put it in Bengali, because we are trying to reach more and more people so that these barriers of language should not occur. ऐसा नहीं कि इंग्लिश में बोल रहे हैं तो इंग्लिश में ही है, ऐसा नहीं. सो एज अ रीजनल सेंटर एंड एज अ as an education institution for IGNOU, we are also committed to fluidity of language and trying to get into a different language thing. So हमारे यहाँ पे जो भी है, so no one should feel left out in that. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Ajit Prasad. Is there anyone else? We'll take another two. Are you all right, Professor Prasad, for another 10 minutes or so with us?
That's fine. That is absolutely fine.
I think people are just expressing their interest right now and how much they enjoyed it.
That is absolutely fine. And these are also very good opportunities. One thing I apologize, मैं हिंदी में बोल तो जरूर सकता हूँ क्योंकि हिंदी is my mother tongue. पर चूंकि
आप हमारे ही हैं, हिंदुस्तानी हैं, बिल्कुल, I know him.
No,
he is
the only difficulty हो जाती है इस बात का because and this is the irony what you pointed out, like I mean what was pointed out.
Once, please leave the forum. Just get out. Thank you. Sorry about that.
So no worries at all. I mean these things. I mean. So to go back again, और ये बड़ी अच्छी बात है कि अगर हम लोग ये कर सकें. Unfortunately क्या होता है कि there is this privileging, and this I saw in Europe. It is so interesting that how I saw so much complaint on this. For example, in France, that वो लोग French नहीं बोल पा रहे क्योंकि English has become the only language, and that is restrictive क्योंकि बहुत सारे knowledge हम लोगों की loss हो जाएंगी अगर हम लोग utilize नहीं कर पाए. So to go back to the first question, the issue at stake is also to be very alert to this. How these various knowledges, क्योंकि जैसे बहुत सारी knowledges जैसे जो use हो रही थी तरह तरह से, जिसका empirical evidence था, but there was no scientific way of putting it, what we call scientific in present time. इसलिए we discredited them. So now we become much more alert to that. But anyway, let's go to the other questions so that we can have more discussion.
Thank you. Payal Das, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, ma'am, I'm there.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. आपका शो मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा और मैं कुछ बोलना चाहूँगी कि इस शो के दौरान बहुत ही
ये शो नहीं है, ये एक्चुअली एक लेक्चर है.
हाँ, लेक्चर है मैम. और इसमें जो प्रॉब्लम हुई है, ये वीडियो में भी आप पॉज कर दीजिए कि जिससे कि हमारा माइंड डिस्कनेक्ट ना हो, और वॉइस में भी बंद कर दीजिए जब सर हमें कुछ भी या मैम बताए. और मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि मैम, मैं एक साइकोलॉजी स्टूडेंट हूँ और ये जो आज का जो भी प्रेजेंटेशन हुआ है उसकी एक छोटी सी टिप्पणी आप बता दें, और ये साइकोलॉजी के साथ कैसे रिलेटेड है इसके बारे में भी आप मुझे बताएं. यही मेरा क्वेश्चन है.
Once again to the disciplinary boundaries, Professor
True.
Prasad, right? Yes.
No,
yes.
and that is a very, very important question. So अगर हम वापस जाएं, is it okay if I might have to just like English because of the fact that I've lived outside for so long.
दोनों मिला के बताइए.
I can switch between the two.
Very comfortable हिंदी और English.
And I would also give you an example. Like for example, like I'm married to a Bengali, and one of my aunts, like she can only speak Bengali, she can't speak Hindi or English. So we realized the best way for us to converse is she speaks Bengali, I speak English, and we converse very, very fine. So to go back to your question, जब ये misinformation वाली जो COVID misinformation जब शुरू हुई थी, conspiracy जब ये when they all these started or so, there were all kinds of psychological studies also which came about, which showed that how during the time of crisis there is a tendency for people to align with certain kinds of misinformation or certain kinds of ways of having certain. So those psychological studies also were very, very important, because what they did was, and psychology is methodologically very, very good at studying that what kind of emotions, feelings, and how they impact a certain kind of behavior. Now, to add nuance to it, what can sociology offer in this regard? So to give you a concrete example, what I found that, let's take the same conspiracy. एक जैसे ये Bill Gates वाली conspiracy जैसे ये थी. Now it is true that the people, based on psychological research that was being shown, that all people might be expressing it because people were very, very anxious, they were nervous with what was going on. Nobody knew if you go back 3 years, nobody knew how long it is going to be there or not. People were dying in big numbers. But as a sociologist, what I found was very, very fascinating as well. So exactly the same conspiracy, the way if you leave aside the fact that it was a wrong information, if you go to the interpretation that was given, I found that, for example, the Black community was using, in the US, the African American community was using very different tropes to justify that misinformation as opposed to the white community. The white community was very often using the tropes of freedom, protection of republic, and all that. And the Black community was talking of slavery, Tuskegee experiment, which had resulted in exploitation and all. The point I'm making here is that our social histories, this is what I mean by history of the present, that the history of the United States as a white settler colonialism continues to play a role even in the time of misinformation and conspiracy interpretations. So what you start seeing is that these are very, very important sociological aspects that also needed to be seen, in spite of the fact that both sides or different groups might have been acting because of certain psychological elements. So what you see here is psychology and sociology and history, they can be complementary rather than trying to disband one over the other. And this is one of the arguments I would present here, that it allows us to better understand, because this also is helpful even in policy matters. Who would be more effective in terms of acting? For example, we found that people who were more community, tied to more community in certain ways and have been involved in certain ways, they could be as effective as, let's say, some of the well-known scientists. So what, again, to go back, and I think it's a very good example that you gave here, the psychological studies provided us some inputs. Sociology can actually provide much more depth to that understanding, that how things go about. History similarly add to better understanding of that why is it that more than 250 years after US independence, around 250 years after US independence, the legacy of white settler colonialism and the racism on which it was established continues to play a role. And this needs to be thought of. For example, in the context of India, we need to think of how caste and gender also plays a very strong part in the spread of misinformation in certain ways.
Yeah, so interesting. We'll take the last question now. And is there anyone here?
मैम, आई एम जस्ट से समथिंग. सर की बातों से मुझे ऐसा लगा कि नॉलेज इज अ को रिलेटेड टू ऑल सब्जेक्ट. दैट इज द मीनिंग जो सर बोल रहे थे, मुझे यही समझ में आया. हिस्ट्री, सोशियोलॉजी एंड साइकोलॉजी इज वेरी को रिलेटेड टू ईच अदर्स. अगर आप नॉलेज लेते हो तो ये सब चीज को आपको जाना ही पड़ेगा, गो थ्रू करना पड़ेगा.
बिल्कुल.
ओके मैम, थैंक यू अमित सर, थैंक यू सो मच.
No worries. I mean, मैं एक ही चीज कहूंगा कि not in a reductive way, that these are complementary. I think each of disciplines can contribute. For example, I don't want to be another psychologist. You are good at it. I would trust your research if it is done rigorously. I do my sociology. So the issue at stake is how do we bring together complementarily? And we saw during the epidemic, the only way for us to have succeeded there would have been to bring together people who were basically scientists, variety of different kinds of scientists, different kinds of social scientists. Otherwise, we cannot succeed. So in a sense, it is about, like as you rightly said, cooperate and complementary with different kinds of methods.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The last question, if anyone's there for any question, or else we can wrap up for this time. I can see Dr. Behra is here too. Dr. Behra is here, my colleague, Assistant Regional Director, Dr. Ajay Behra. Would you like to ask something?
No, not. I am not asking any question. Thank you, sir, for your kind
Yes.
acceptance of the conference. And the thing is, your deliberation is quite good, and in fact, it is really an encouragement for the learner to listen to you. The other thing is, really, your presentation definitely have an inspiration of the learner.
Sorry about the
to think forward about
Yes.
the supplementary correlations of each disciplines towards gaining knowledge and having understanding of that particular concept, of any particular concept. So thank you very much, sir, for your kind actor. Thank you.
That's on behalf, a thank you note for you on behalf of Kolkata Regional Center. That's what Dr. Behra just gave you. And Thank you very much, Professor Prasad. This has been a wonderful opportunity. You've taken out your time and been with all our students. As you know, IGNOU, the wide diversity that IGNOU possesses here is amazing. We have students from different professional stage of their career, to absolute professionals, to simple housewives. So this is an amazing university on its own, and I think we are extremely privileged to have you here with us. Thank you so much. I think we can call it a day, and all the best to you, and have a very, very good day.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And you are starting your day. So that's how it is. End with Tagore's Tomar holo shuru, amaro do shara. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much again. This was a pleasure, and I'm really, really glad, like the way this, like the diversity that you have of people of like who can be there, and hopefully there will be also other occasions to like interact with the group. And I am really happy. Thank you again, and I love to hear more like about what you people are doing. I would just keep saying again, do your whatever you're doing, more interesting things. There's so much to do. I mean, thanks a lot.
You can visit us sometime when you are in India, of course.
I would surely.
See where we are, and you can visit us here, and we can actually have a live interaction for you, planned for you, maybe.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye
Thank you all.
Bye, all of you. Thank you very much, learners, for being there, and our invited guests. If any one of you have been here, thank you for participating, and a very good night. Thank you very much.